welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
So we're going to go right into the screen share. Let's see if I can find it. There it is. Let's see here. So we are again in vaYigash, and we had finished yesterday. We were in the middle of a Rashi yesterday, and I had was struggling with the translation of this particular Rashi, and now I have a better sense of what it's about. So first of all, it comes from a root bur, and that means like wild. In fact, a bur, when you refer to a person as a bur, it means they're uncultivated, they're wild. So it was a comment on the word lo tesham, it shall not, excuse me, become desolate. And the point that what wasn't said here is that Rashi usually introduces a reference to the Targum, like Targumo or something like that. And here there's no reference to the Targum at all, but it is in fact a reference to the Targum. And let's see if we can find it here, lo tesham. And there's the Aramaic right here, lo tavur, right? So that's this interesting Aramaism or Aramaic translation of the word tesham. The word tesham comes from a word shmama, which means to be, desolate. That's what shmama refers to. So here we are, shmama. Lo tavur means it is not cultivated, let go wild. And I made a note to myself that in fact this was a reference to the Targum. And he quotes a passage possibly from the Mishnah, which says, Lashon, this is the same meaning as shadeh, sadeh, bur, which means a wild or an uncultivated field, she'eino charush, which is unplowed. So there's the cultivation going on, of course, is the plowing of the field. So the back into the context, of course, is that the Egyptians are saying to Joseph, to give them seed so that they can plant and that the land won't become uncultivated. So I remember from doing some gardening myself that when you don't, the first time you dig up a plot, you find lots and lots of stones. And in the second year, when you dig it up again, of course, it's a lot easier to dig up. But somehow there's still more stones. It's as if stones seem to procreate. At any rate, there was just a personal experience that I've had. So anyway, let's go on. Vayiken Yosef, Joseph acquired Kol Admat Mitzrayim leFaro, all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. Imachru Mitzrayim ish sadehu, because the Egyptians sold every Egyptian, ish Mitzrayim ish sadehu, each man sold his field. Ki chazak alehem hara'av, because the famine was so strong, and v'tihia aretz leFaro, and the land then became Pharaoh's. And of course, this raises on some levels issues of ownership, and to what extent, of course, at the very outset, do we own anything, since the earth is the Lord's? But at least from that point on down, to the degree that we are tenants of some kind, but what rights do we have in terms of when you have ownership, what level of ownership do you have? What rights of ownership do you have? So apparently, at least here, Joseph is securing a level of ownership to Pharaoh, which is going to have ramifications, you'll see. And I won't give that away right now. Let's take a look at the Rashi. V'tehi ha'aretz leFaro, and the land became Pharaoh's. Knuyalo, when it says it became, all it means is, Rashi tells us, is it was acquired by him. He acquired the land. So these are still issues, of course, for today as well. When we purchase land here in the United States, it gives us certain rights over that real estate, but it doesn't give us ultimate rights over the real estate. And on some levels, of course, the United States and the government, expressed through the government of the United States, whether it's through local or state or national, federal, they all have certain rights of ownership towards what we purchase. So at any rate, what you can do on that property. So let's go on. Ve'et ha'am he'evir oto le'arim. So this is talking about Joseph. He took the nation, the people, and he moved them to different cities, to different localities. In other words, he took one population and had them moved to another area. From one edge of the border of Egypt to the other end, to the other edge. So the entire population, he moved it around, he repopulated it in the sense that he had the population moving over to various places. And Rashi's going to explain what his motivation was. And as for the people, the Egyptians, he moved them around. Yosef, that is, he is referring to Joseph. It wasn't Pharaoh who did this. Joseph did this. Me'ir le'ir, from one town to another town, lezichron, as a reminder, she'ein lahem od chelek ba'aretz, to remind them that their portion in the land it no longer belonged to them as it had in the past. V'hoshiv shel ir zo bechaverta. And what he would do is he would populate this particular city with its neighboring population. So it wasn't like he made them move, miles and miles and miles. Basically, it was from one town to a neighboring town. And it wasn't necessary for Scripture to mention this, to write this down. Ela lo hodiacha, but to let you know, shivcho shel Yosef, how great Joseph was. This is in praise of Joseph. Shenit gaven lahasir cherpa, because his intention also was to remove any sense of shame me'al achiv, from his brothers, that his brothers shouldn't feel shame, shelo yiyu korim otam golim, that people shouldn't refer to them as exiles. And of course, there is the whole idea, right, of being a native of a place and the level of pride it gives you, or security, or these kinds of feelings that people who are native to a town or a city and live there all their lives have to people who move there. So there's some sense of lower status to someone who's a newbie, as opposed to someone who's been there for generations and generations. And again, I think this has some connection to ownership. The whole idea, perhaps, of nomadic existence is the fact that you never get to feel that sense of permanence, because on some levels, from a spiritual level, the idea, I believe, of that nomadic life, even though it might be a necessity, but on some levels, it is also considered a spiritual practice, that you don't feel that you're here permanently, and to remember the temporality of life here, which with its implications as to our own behavior and our own level of arrogance and all kinds of other things, implications that has. Miktzei Gvul Mitzrayim, from one end of the border of Egypt, etc. Kein asa lachol ha'arim. So he made no exceptions. So no one town or population of one town, could say or boast to the other town, right? Asher b'malchut Mitzrayim, which were in the kingdom of Egypt, miktzei gvula, from one edge of its border, v'ad ktzei gdula, to the other border, onwards. Rak, however, there's a rak, means however, so there's an exception. Admat HaKohanim Lokana. He did not acquire the land of the Kohanim, the priests. Ki chok laKohanim, because it was an allotment to the priests, me'et Paro, from Pharaoh, va'achlu et chukam, and they were able to consume their allotment, asher natan lahem Paro, which Pharaoh gave to them. So they never had to come to Joseph to beg for corn, because they were apportioned this regardless. And I felt like it's this chok here is like a perquisite. Al kain lo machru et matam, and for this reason they didn't sell their land. So there are a few little issues here for Rashi to deal with. So here we go. HaKohanim. First of all, what do we mean by Kohanim? By priests. HaKomrim, he's talking about, Komrim means like it's another, I think it's a modern Hebrew word for like a monk. So we're talking about this. And there's a reason he says this. He says, Kol Lashon Kohen, the term Kohen always refers to a misharet, a minister. And that's what the word Kohen basically means. It means a minister, one who ministers, whether they're ministering to God or have some other ministration that they have. So, for example, when we talk about a prime minister, we're not referring to a religious ministry. We're talking about another kind of ministry to the population, right? Or to the citizens. So, Kohen, Misharet le'elohut hu. So it's a reference to ministering to their God, right? Or to some divine being. Chutz me'otan shehem lashon gedula, with the exception of those references to Kohanim which actually refer to rank, high rank, kamo Kohen Midyan. So, for example, when it refers to Jethro as the Kohen of Midyan, it's referring to his rank, that he's a chieftain, Kohen on, or I believe, I'm trying to think if this is Melchizedek, who's, again, not necessarily so much a religious minister as a chieftain. Chok, and what do we mean by the word chok? Generally, it means a statute. That's how we translate it. And in Jewish law, a chok means a statute, i.e., a kind of a halacha or a law that doesn't necessarily have a rationale behind it, but rather something that's a commandment from God. So here we say, chok kach b'chach lahem layom. So the statutory amount that of lechem, of food every day, that they were given this stipulated amount of food, this perk. Onwards. Vayomer Yosef el ha'am, and Joseph said to the population, to the people, Hein kaniti etchem hayom, indeed I have acquired you today, ve'et admatchem, and your land, the Pharaoh, for Pharaoh. Hey lachem zera, here is seed for you, was ratem et adama, so that you can sow the land. Hey, this word hey, it means kamohine. It means the same as behold or indeed, right? So it's an intensive. It's a way of making more intense the statement that's being said following it. Kamo, and here's an example: V'gam ani he darkacha barosh natati. He says, and as for me, this is probably God speaking, right? Indeed, I have placed your way upon your head, meaning essentially you are suffering now the consequences of your behavior. So, indeed, that's the truth. V'haya betvuot, and it shall be that when you harvest, when you have the tvuah, the harvest, the crops, unatatem chamishit leFaro. So on account of this, you shall give 1/5 to Pharaoh. So in other words, 20% of whatever they harvested was to go as a tax to Pharaoh. And that was the practical outcome, as I said, with what Joseph was doing. But arba hayadot, and the other 4 portions, yelachem lezera hasadeh ula'ach lachem. That the remaining 4 parts will be yours to sow the field and to consume, to eat. Ula'asher bevatechem, and for those who are in your households, ula'echol letapchen, and also for your young children to eat as well. So the essentially what it meant, as what Joseph had done, was to give Pharaoh a right of taxation on these people now. So certainly it would provide funds now and food, etc., for the administration. So the whole notion of taxation and its benefits. A lazer hasadeh, for the seed of the field, literally, shebechol shana, that is every year. In other words, so that you can sow your seed every year in the field. Ula asher bevatechem, to those in your households, echol ha'avadim, and for the hashvachot, for your servants and maidservants to eat, asher bevatechem, who are in your homes. So asher bevatechem, those who are in your homes, Rashi is saying that's a reference then to anyone, including not necessarily just their family members, but anyone who, the reason for this particular expression was to include servants, etc., who were also working in their homes. Tapchem, he's explaining this word, banim ktanim. It means small children, little children. Minors, in other words. And I think the implication is they were not people who could work on the farm. Vayomru, and they said, that is the Egyptians, said to Joseph, Hecheyi tanu, you've caused us to live. You've helped us to survive. Nimtzachen be'enei Adoni, may we find favor in the eyes of our Lord. V'hayinu avadim leFaro, and we shall be servants, slaves to Pharaoh. Let's see if there's nimtzachen. Let us find favor. Lasot lanu zot kamo shamarta. So in other words, as you are saying, what you're proposing, Joseph, we hope is acceptable. Those are more than generous. To do for us zot, this kamo shamarta, just as you said. So we will be able to actually, of course, survive well. 20% tax, at least on the food, probably would give them enough, I would suspect. V'hayinu avadim leFaro, we shall be servants to Pharaoh. L'ha'alot lo hamas, look at this, to provide him the tax. Mas is a tax. Hazeh, this tax. B'chol shana, every year. L'chok, as a chok, he'll translate this. In other words, as a statute, shelo ya'avor. And the point about this is a statute which will not be abrogated. We accept this as a permanent statute. Vayasim ota Yosef, and Joseph made it l'chok ad hayom hazeh, as a statute to this day, al admat Mitzrayim, regarding the land of Egypt, leFaro lechomesh, to Pharaoh as a 1/5. Rak admat hakohanim, only the land of the priests, levadam alone, lo haita leFaro, did not become Pharaoh's. Pharaoh didn't own that. He had no rights of property on that, of ownership. Let's see if there's any. No, that's no Rashi on that. Vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim be'eretz Goshen, and Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen. Vayeachzu, they took possession in it. Vayifru v'yirbu me'od, and they were fruitful and multiplied greatly there. So this is getting close to the end of the story, of course. Vayeshev Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim. Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt. So it could be, here it's probably referring to Jacob. Vehechan be'eretz Goshen, and where specifically? Be'eretz Goshen, in the land of Goshen, shehi me'eretz Mitzrayim, because the land of Goshen is part of the land of Egypt. Vayeachsuba, and they took a holding in it, they took possession of it, and he says Lashon Achiza. This has the meaning of Achiza, means to hold on to something, right? So they took possession, in other words, in that sense. And this says Chasalt Parshat vaYigash. We have now come to the end of the Parsha of vaYigash, and this may be the first Parsha that we've actually completed. So, of course, there's tomorrow, and my thought is that what we can do there is possibly look at Torah Tamima, see what Torah Tamima has to say about it, and my thought is that we'll go back to the beginning of the Parsha and take a look at Torah Tamima on it. So that is it for today, for now. And I'm going to stop the share. And if any of you have any comments before I stop the recording.
Yes, I
I
do.
do.
Okay, sure. Okay, Lisa.
Thank you. I've always been delighted when I've heard you talk about the stones in the earth and how they
Yeah.
seem to, give birth to each other. And
Yes.
it also brings to mind that our perceptions of things are very interesting, because for the earth, it's just natural to keep turning, and not just turning on its on its axis, but turning within itself and bringing up more and more rocks as things. And it's natural for the earth to do that.
Yeah.
So us, with our perceptions, we view it as, oh, there are more rocks here. Well, there are actually the same amount of rocks in the earth. No.
Right.
So anyway.
Right. Good point.
Blame the worms and the other bugs because they're doing all that stuff underground.
That's sort of an interesting explanation. Obviously, it's so much easier to cultivate it once you've done the initial cultivation. But it is, I've cultivated in Minnesota, right? The earth in Minnesota is so rich, it's unbelievable. Of course, Iowa is even crazier because the glaciers left so much, rich soil there. I've done some in Canton. I think I did some gardening in St. Louis, and of course I've also done some gardening in California. And of course California is like adobe, it seems. Is that how you describe a lot of
Yes. Where you were and where I am is adobe.
Right. So you have to work with it. In other words, like you have to supplement it to really make it productive. You can't just use adobe, unless, of course, we're talking about plants that naturally thrive in adobe soil. Yeah, it's interesting. It's there's so much to it and so much to learn about it.
Yeah, another thing about what you just said was how we need to amend it.
Yes,
So
exactly.
with the soil, if we were not clearing away all of the natural things that fall into the soil, so if we were not making the adobe retain its attribute of being hard, then all of the nutrients that are natural to making this fertile would be, in the soil and available for us to naturally just keep letting it feed itself. And So I just think all of this is so interesting because our perceptions of things, of how they are within our realities,
Mm.
are wonderful. And I love sharing all these things because there's such a plethora of differences
Mm.
amongst our perceptions.
Right, right. It's true.
Well, I have something too to say.
Sure.
The priests, the Egyptian priests were very high up in standing, and therefore they owned some land. Where our priests are were not. We it was the same thing. The Levites were also, they didn't own any land, but they were given food and everything. They call it treats, or what do they call it? I can't remember.
Ivan.
Price, uh, 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 and they were commanded to guard the Mishkan, but it was different. It was a little different. Here, the Egyptian priests were very high up and got everything, and our priests, weren't that high up, but they were guarding God's temple. It was wonderful. It was a
Yeah.
little different. That's all I got to say. And not only that, I'm surprised that Joseph and Jacob didn't assimilate into the Egyptian way of life. Maybe God said, "I'm not going to let you go into Egyptian way of life because that was entirely wrong, to do."
So a couple of things. One is that, of course, the Levites did get cities. So the Levites did have some holding and some territory, and they were given these cities around, sprinkled through the land of Israel, where they actually had property. And the priests were definitely given perks, a whole bunch of perks. So in some ways, there's really is a reflection of that going on within Jewish life as well. I mean, basically, we want them to be more spiritual, and so they don't have the same level of property that others do. But I wouldn't say that Kohanim or Levites, for that matter, were on a lower level. The fact is that the Kohen is always given the first of any opportunity. The Kohen gets the first aliyah when called up to the Torah. The Levite is given the second aliyah. So no, there's certainly, I think, a great respect given to the ministers. Exactly the same as Egyptians, I don't know, but there are definitely some similarities, and there are things that were positive that the Israelites learned from the Egyptians, including the whole issue of afterlife. That is something that is very prevalent within Egyptian culture, stuff like that. So yeah. By the way, Harlan, you'd mentioned, remember yesterday about Jacob going down to Egypt. So if you check, I believe it's chapter 46, at the very beginning of chapter 46, you'll see of Genesis, you'll see how God absolutely tells Jacob not to worry about going down to Egypt, and that in fact that's what he's supposed to do. So you'll see it there in chapter 46.
Also told Abraham, you will live in a land that's not yours.
That's true.
Yep.
They say that the birth of Isaac marks the beginning of that prophecy coming true, right? Actually, okay, I'm going to stop our recording here. Golda, did you want to say anything before I
Nope.
went?
I'm saying good day.